Hi, I'm Paul Shred, International Editor of the Cyber Express, and with me is Binu Arora, Founder and CEO of Cyber Threat Intelligence leader Cyble. Welcome, Binu, and welcome to our audience also.
Thanks for having me today, Paul. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. We are here to talk about the unique cybersecurity needs of startups who need to move quickly, but also need to really protect their intellectual property, customer base, and other critical needs. Binu has been on both sides of that issue, both as a founder and an advisor to startups. So we will offer some tips and shortcuts so startups can get to good security faster. That's our goal today. And Binu, why don't we start with how do startup needs differ from those of larger organizations?
I think the largest difference is, Paul, is the pace of innovation. I think when it comes to startups, I can only think about three words, which is shipping. Ultimately, their objective is to make products that people love to use, and they don't really have so much of time or bandwidth to do it. We are living in a AI era. It's hyper competitive now, and ultimately, the customers don't really have too much of time to look at so many different products in the market. So the attention span is very, very low. And ultimately, that's what is really pushing the startups to basically not just build amazing products, but also try to get them out as quickly as possible. Now, compared to larger enterprise, and I've been fortunate enough to work with some of the largest companies in the world, I think the focus is not about just about the innovation. It's all about also making the business sustainable. There's a lot of factors which comes into play. Like for an example, if you're gonna ship a product which is buggy, it doesn't impact your reputation, are there legal implications, and so forth, compliances. The list keeps going. I think that those important needs often tends to slow down, at which they can be it slows down the pace of their innovation cycles. And I think they take a little bit more risk averse approach in that scenario, which is, by the way, right, given that the scale of that company involved and so many shareholders looking up to them for the right reasons. So I think those are some of the fundamental differences on how people tend to operate in these two different environments. Again, sometimes works well for the kind of projects or kind of the products they're working upon, but the world is still rapidly changing. I see there's larger companies are also becoming a lot more agile since startups are giving them a kind of a challenge in many of these markets, especially in the high tech space.
Yeah, definitely. So what are the biggest threats and risks that startups face?
I'll probably cover about a topic which is relevant for this webinar. I think cybersecurity is definitely one of the biggest risks to any growing startup. But let me put some colors. In the last 7 to 10 years, we've seen amazing amazing startups coming out of the market. Many of them actually have also IPO'd. If you look back, while there's an amazing success story for many of the startups, many companies had massive setbacks because they were not thinking about cybersecurity when they were building up their infrastructure or their products or their teams. Often there were so many lapses on how these products were put out on to the customers or to the world. Now those lax security environments allowed hackers to basically go in and do whatever they were doing. And what we have seen, this is again based upon the information on the internet, hundreds of millions of people's personal information got exposed in all different jurisdictions, from the US to the Asia to Europe and so forth. I don't really think anybody on this planet who is on the internet is not impacted yet by a cyber attack. I think most of the people have been, myself included. I think so. If I look back here, while there are so many threats to any startups, all the way from making sure that they're ahead of the innovation cycle, ensuring that they're not, running out of money and so forth. There's so many things, kind of work. But cybersecurity is definitely becoming one of the top 3 challenges for any early or growing, growth stage startups, including Cyber. to ensure that the customer trust, doesn't get eroded. I mean, especially when you're a younger company, customers tend to look at you that, hey, are you going to be around in the next couple of years? That's the first question they're going to ask you. And, it's all about trust and credibility, especially when you are a very young company at the end of the day. And if you're going to end up getting breached and the customer information getting exposed, that trust gets eroded very, very quickly. And then the customer acquisition becomes a lot more expensive exercise. Ultimately, that has a significant impact on its growth curve. And as we all know, startups want to make sure that they are growing at an accelerating rate. And breaches or lapses in cybersecurity has a potential to invert that growth, the growth curve itself. So that's my 2 cents on that particular topic.
Wow, those are some great points. Are there any real world examples of early stage startups that have been hacked and lessons that we could learn from those?
I think if you just look at back in the last 48 hours, we are seeing tons of breaches already, especially for younger stage startups, which are getting compromised, breached, or their data getting inadvertently exposed on the internet, which leads to their customer information or data loss. This is about 48 hours, by the way. So if I have to go back, I think almost, I would say there's a good population of startups which have been breached already. I think the most interesting one, I would say that there is a DNA testing technology company, which, by the way, is a very exciting concept, And I must admit, what they are doing in the space is mind blowing. Trying to connect your ancestors and everything. But we have seen instances where even that company got breached, and that ended up leaking the DNA information of all the people, of all the customers. Now, you might think what somebody can do about it. The answer is, with the information in the right hands, can reveal a lot more information about individuals, including their health conditions and so forth. We see healthcare companies, getting breached, and people's health records are getting compromised. Financial information, people are transacting through, for different fintech companies, connecting their bank accounts, and that information getting breached, and all their account information getting disclosed. So I think, without going into specifics over here, I think there are, if not, thousands, there are, probably tens of thousands of examples we can look into over the last 10 to 15 years where. And I don't necessarily think that this was actually the fault of any founders or any of the management team. I think it's just when you are trying to accelerate the pace of, further accelerating your innovation cycle, people tend to overlook, many aspects around their security controls layers. And those lapses is inadvertently giving opportunity to the bad guys who are able to get into their networks or their systems and then be able to take the data away. We have seen many examples where a cybersecurity breach actually crippled the startup. They were not able to raise any further money because of the reputation damage it caused to them. And there are many of these such examples out there. I think there's a pretty big graveyard of startups which actually, we couldn't survive because of a high-profile cyber or data breach in their organization. So it's a long list.
Wow, that's terrible. What are the kinds of questions that VCs are asking when they're looking at a deal? Are there any deal breakers? Any common mistakes you see?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all starts about what kind of data startups are producing or consuming in a way. I think a lot of VCs are concerned about the regulatory or compliance related risks, especially when you are handling any personal data or any payment data, for an example, or health data. And they would always ask. I mean, this is something happened to Cyber as well when we were raising capital. In terms of how our security controls are designed, how we are managing those controls, how we are reporting it, but more importantly, who is certifying that those controls are operating effectively. So at the end of the day, I think most of the mature venture capitalists, are aware of the risks in terms of mishandling of sensitive customer data, and this becomes like one of their, one of the points in the checklist when they look at any company, especially from a capital deployment perspective, in terms of their maturity to be able to, not just scale the company to get more customer, but how they're going to be able to secure that customer data effectively. I think that's where most of the VCs are now looking into it closely. And there's a lot of compliance requirements which are also kind of enforced not just by the VCs but also by the customers now. Like many customers would often say, like, are you ISO 27000 certified? Or are you ISO, the SOC 2 Type 2 certified? So there are very specific asks which the customers are also asking. And I think as I've seen in many cases now in the startup wars, they're actively going for those compliance requirements and investing in those resources. Ultimately, it benefits the end customer whose data is being handled either by the startup or or by a VC who's looking at a deal. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Huh. Okay. So we've talked about it as a need, but is good security also a competitive advantage? Is there a business benefit to it?
I don't think necessarily that it's becoming like a competitive advantage. I think this is becoming like the essential part of it. I mean, people, especially when you are dealing with large enterprises or you're dealing with a larger customer base, it is becoming a must-have rather than nice to have. So, if you're saying that I have better security than somebody else's, it's not really a competitive advantage. It's becoming a hygiene. Like, do you shower every day, for an example? So, it is becoming an imperative for any of these companies to be able to not winning the trust, but to acquire any customer. I think you would hardly see any startup these days where you say, I'm actually better because I have more security than this particular guy. Customers are saying, no, I don't care. You're better. You should have it no matter what. Everybody should have it. Just like people expect to have an amazing customer experience when they work with a startup or a large enterprises, they expect that the entities who they are handling their personal information or their sensitive information, those entities are taking care of it. It's a matter of due care. And this is not just a nice to have area. It's a fundamental expectation from the consumers or from the large enterprise that their data is going into safe hands. And if startups are not able to meet those requirements, there is no trust, which means your customer acquisition costs will skyrocket because everybody say, why should I trust you if you're not even, keeping your front yard and backyard clean and tidy? I mean, this becomes a deal breaker, period.
Interesting. Well, let's get into some details. What do you see as the minimum viable security that every startup needs?
Yeah, I think when it comes to the, this is a great question, first of all. Any startups, I look at always, three things, on how they are putting up the right security measures and controls. Of course, there are tons of standards, right? You have, NIST standards, you have ISO, there's SOC 2. I mean, there's so many standards out there. So I'm not going to touch on that part. I think that information is already available. I think what I look for is, again, going to the fundamentals here instead of going for any moonshots. I think people, process, technology. Let's talk about the people part of it. Do you have anybody who is taking the responsibility in order to keep a track or govern the security controls and measures in the organization? It's a straight answer, yes or no. Generally, when it comes to the younger startups, most of the time they don't really have a CISO. in the companies. In fact, many of them don't have even a security manager or analyst. It's mostly the CTO who is actually doing, the security task as well as another activities they're responsible for. So when you start maturing, I think one thing which I always look for is, are they investing when it comes to protecting the customer or the enterprise's data? That's the first thing. So are they investing on the right skill set, on the people? I think that's the one thing. There's no choice over there, in my opinion, especially when you are dealing with sensitive data. I think the second part comes is on the processes, and these are processes. We're not talking about typical change management or how you're deploying your application, what's your change, release cycles, etc., etc. I think what's very important is on how they are monitoring the security controls, if any, and then second, if things goes wrong, what they're gonna do about it. So do they have any defined like incident response plans? Like if they see some, malicious activity, just somebody, there's some, anomaly or behavior in a database system, do they have a plan how to deal with it? More importantly, if let's say worst case scenario, and God forbids that, the systems do get breached, do they have a plan how they're gonna, tackle the communications with the customers and giving a full transparent disclosure on what actually happened and what they're gonna do about it in the future? So it's more about the aftermath of a data breach. I think the processes are, very important, especially, when things are working fine, nobody kind of cares about it. But when something happens, all eyes are on you, and I think even for Cyber, I think we were like 20 people, actually less than 20 people when we brought in our first CISO in the company, because we are also, processing tons of data, and some people can also categorize that to be sensitive data. And we were very cognizant about it in terms of we need to make sure that we are putting enough attention on not just about the technical controls, like your SIEM, on how you are, managing the alerts, how you are, responding to those alerts or events or incidents, but a lot more dedicated focus on creating the processes. And that starts not at the process of, just about, how you manage the incident response. It actually starts right at the design itself. So when you are putting up, let's say so you have your design team who are building up a new feature or fixing a new feature. Are they considering on how we can improve the security controls right up there? And that, how do you actually enforce those processes are being also taken care of when you are actually building up the product? So make sure, often you would be surprised, or maybe not so. Many developers end up using a lot of open source libraries in their code. And what history has taught us is that many of the open source libraries end up getting rigged or get infected with malware. And once they install, because developers say, yeah, it's pretty cool, I'm going to do a pip install this package, everything is going to work. And then you realize that like a few months down the line that the package was infected. And all the time when you were running this in the production code, it was leaking out your AWS secret keys out there to somebody. And it has happened to many, many, many companies. So processes on how you can use third-party libraries, which ones you trust, which you don't trust. I know it's a part of a supply chain risk, but by the way, it's becoming a lot more prominent now, especially when hackers are trying to, scale up their operations by infecting those fundamental libraries with bad code. So these are like a people process kind of the area, but third party is a technology piece, which is not basic. Many companies are able to, buy it by themselves because of they're still pretty early. But I think many of the cloud service providers, including AWS, GCP, or at least the big ones like DigitalOcean, they do provide certain suite of security controls, which is not very expensive, in my humble opinion, given the cost implication if something goes wrong. I think those controls can be bolted into the products as well as on the overall infrastructure on what you're creating within the cloud environment, and that can give you a lot more flexibility. But more importantly, I think the visibility on what's happening in your environment And then obviously it's a continuous, iteration, in my opinion. As you build your security control layers, you have to keep on investing on it. Uh, and I think I want to be also careful about that. It shouldn't be overkill. I think it's always taking a risk-based approach to ensure that your control layers are proportionate to the risks which are coming towards you as an organization. But it shouldn't be an aftermath or after effect, in my opinion. It should be like, one of the most fundamental things you have to think about when you are building up or converting an idea to its implementation.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's probably much easier to build in good security from the start than to add it later.
It's expensive otherwise, right?
Yeah. Are there any free or low cost tools that you think are well suited for startups? Anything come to mind?
Well, I mean, the open source community is full of, these projects. Again, there are risks involved because they also end up using many, many open source libraries, and we already talked about the risk involved there. I think, in my opinion, there are several tools which are now offered by the cloud platforms themselves, which is mostly like a click and deploy model, be it on the log aggregation or log analytics and, alerting capability or getting notification if something goes wrong. I think the cloud infrastructure has evolved in the last 15 years. They're becoming a lot more, I think, smarter than what they used to be. I think, and you don't necessarily have to have a list of tools. I mean, there are like, hundreds if not thousands of security tools out there, all the way from the basis recon to port scan to pen test and everything. But I think there are certain activities which are important purely from a testing of a control design effectiveness perspective. But when it comes to deployment of tooling, I think especially for startups, I'd be very careful for them, to go out and buy these big expensive tools out there, and there are heaps of it. I think there are definitely SMB focused cybersecurity companies as well, including Cyber, by the way, where we continuously help them to scan the internet for any misconfiguration, any of the leaks, but also monitoring their cloud environment for any misconfigurations. So there are definitely options to work with SMB focused companies, including like Cyber, but then also potential to utilize the security tooling which is offered straight from the cloud platform. It's not that highly mature yet. I think this is a continuous journey, but it's still better than having nothing. And as I always say this thing, when I look at any potential cyber threat, I look at the cyber kill chain. There are so many steps that have to go right for a threat actor to be able to successfully exfiltrate your data out or to be able to jeopardize your operation. They have to do a lot of things right to make that happen. And we as defenders, we have to be right at only one part of the kill chain. That just kills the chain. So I think it's an interesting concept, in my opinion, something which has been followed by military for a long time, and cybersecurity industry has successfully adopted it. I think it's not about like putting too many controls in the whole chain. It's all about building the right controls which can stop a successful attack from happening. And that's what I think requires a little bit more deeper thinking than just putting up tooling in the environment.
Yeah, so it's possible then that maybe instead of free tools, they should be looking at things that can kind of automate these processes for them and make it easier. Maybe that's what they really need. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think tons of security companies and startups are actually doing in the same direction. I mean, I'll give you an example, like with Cyber, for example, many companies are trying to do their penetration tests and vulnerability assessments, right? And they want to test the application for weaknesses or security issues or configuration issues, right? In the old world, there used to be a big team of people, doing VAs or penetration tests, with different, use cases and so forth. And there's a big industry out there, which are just doing security testing. I think what we have learned over the period of time that many of these And look, penetration testing is still an art, so I don't want to discount it in the sense that you can fully automate this whole thing. I think there's a difference between a machine generated, picture versus a human generated picture. It's just the creativity is, maybe in the age of AGI, we will be able to get closer to it, but not there yet. But I think when it comes to some of the, foundational security control testing, including vulnerability assessments or, doing like a level 1 penetration test, I think those are the areas which can be fully automated. Even Cyber offers that capability to all of their customers, and we are serving more than 500 large enterprises today. And what we offer them is that you can basically, you don't even have to schedule a scan for that. I mean, you just let us know what the applications are, or if you don't tell us, we'll figure out for you as part of ASM or attack surface management capability, and then we can go and figure it out on, ourselves, without your intervention, doing all sort of scans on your applications, and then being able to tell you, where to fix, what to fix, and how to fix. So those are things we will educate you. I think the technology has already gone to that level, but there are definitely certain elements when it comes to the protection, which may require a human, human intelligence or human involved there. But that gap is also closing as the AI is getting better every day. I think in the next 3 to 4 years, we see it's going to be a very different. We're going to be in a different age altogether.
Wow, nice. Huh. So, what are the must-haves that a startup needs to have in place before they land their first enterprise customer? Like, what are you looking for when you get to that level?
I think the first part is I mean, I think most of the startups are going in this one direction to get a SOC 2 certification, because many of the large enterprises are asking for, how are you securing my data, or how are you securing my platform? Now, SOC 2, and there's a different type 1, type 2, the different nuances behind it. I think most of the startups, when they are, and this is, by the way, this is a conversation I had literally 3 days ago. 3 days ago, one of the young startups basically reached out to me. He said, Pinu, we're about to land into this large enterprise. I said, congratulations. And I said, the thing which they want to know is how we are securing the data of customers. And I said, yeah, that sounds to be like a logical question they're asking. And they said, what are you going to do about it? I said, look, there's not one thing you have to do about it. I think let's agree upon what standard you want to actually implement across your organization. And you can pick which one, like ISO 27000 or SOC. It's your choice at the end of the day. Ultimately, they decided to go with the SOC, control designs, and then they eventually, are planning towards the testing of those controls. But one of the things they want to also check for is, doing a penetration test on their website. And interesting, many of the startups think that the penetration testing is like a job you can just do it like within 2 hours. That's not necessarily the case. I think often, as I said, security is not really a checklist. And that's what, I always tend to educate them that, we need to spend, adequate time when it comes to testing up your security design within your products or your infrastructure. Can be done in 2 hours, can take maybe a couple of weeks, who knows, depending on the complexity of the application. So, this is what, they get, a lot of these questions these days, like how often they're getting your penetration tests. Are you compliant to any of the industry, regulations? They also talk about like how you are managing your backups. If let's say, God forbid, you get a ransomware attack, are you able to get your systems online? Do you have, a change management process which accounts security into it? So what's your security software development lifecycle processes? There is tons of questions when it comes to cybersecurity now. In fact, I remember, this was for Cyber, I think 4 years ago. One of our large customers in the US, when we were, we got this technical sign off from the buying team in the sense, but then they kind of forwarded our onboarding to the third party risk management team, the TPTRM. And many large enterprises, they actually have a dedicated function for that, whose job is to basically look at the startup and understand, are they really good to work with? Are they too risky working with? That's their job. I mean, that's many of the large enterprises already have a dedicated team who are looking at third parties, or they are looking at the supply chain risks. And they generally have a long list of questionnaires. And these are like, we're talking about like, range of 40 to 50 questions. And they look at everything, like how often, do you doing vulnerability assessments of your infrastructure? How are ensuring that your AI models are not divulging any sensitive or private data? I mean, the list it's pretty long. And I think, and this is what I tell every startup. If you really want to work with a large enterprise, you have to start very early in terms of building up your cybersecurity program. I think large enterprises understand that you don't have sufficient capital to be able to do everything what they like to see. I think it's all about making sure you put your investments based upon the risks and be transparent about what you have in place. But more importantly, share the information on what you would be doing over the period of 6 to 12 months as you're improving your security layers. And I think large enterprises like to see the startups that they are taking security as a foundational part when they're building up their companies and the product, not like an extra add-on. Let's put this in today so that we can win the contracts. That path is not going to take you, too far, in my opinion. I think ultimately you'll get breached and those customers will be churned out.
Oh. We've mentioned customer data quite a few times. What are the legal obligations that startups face there? What do they need to do to protect it? What are the minimum things they need to be doing that they need to be able to show customers or regulators?
So, full disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not either a privacy guru here, but I think I can tell you based upon my professional experiences is whenever you are working with any enterprise or any consumer data. I mean, if you are dealing with the PHI, PII, financial information, or any sensitive data which may have a linkage to the national security, for an example, there's a tons of obligations you're getting into. I mean, period. I mean, if you look at the contracts which large enterprise make you sign, there's a range of obligations and liabilities and indemnities and so forth, which that comes with. Startup founders suddenly just say that, whatever, I'm gonna sign everything and put my life at stake. But trust me, I mean, when shit hits the fan, it becomes a nightmare to manage. So what the nightmare looks like, I think let's take an example, like when you are collecting and storing the personal identified information of your customers. Now, many states in the US, including California, has got pretty strict regulations or penalties if you are not able to protect your PI information of your consumers or your customers or enterprises. And those penalties can be very, very expensive, by the way. It can really break down the entire company, and it has in many cases. I mean, let's look at the GDPR. I mean, GDPR goes a whole new level altogether. Their classification of PI itself is interesting. And I think, if I remember correctly, that they are, for the larger breaches, for the larger companies, that they can take up to a certain percentage of your revenue. That's the kind of the level of the impact these people are able to do it. I think coming back to this question, if you are, I think this is probably a good idea when you are, building up your products. I think just be truthful about what information you are collecting, what information you are processing, and what information ultimately you are storing in your system. Because the data governance is a very important piece, which many people think it's boring. It's actually the most sensitive part. It's all around the data at the end of the day. And there are different regulations or requirements on which layer are you. If you are, you know, if you're processing data but not showing the data, that still actually has many obligations what you have to fulfill. And it's always ideal. I mean, I'm not saying that you go and hire expensive lawyers. So apologies to my friends who are in the legal industry, because, I mean, what I want to say is, I think you can always, consult with a privacy consultant, and there are good consultants out there. They're not super exorbitant expensive either. I think they can reasonably look at your entire data lifecycle, and then they can give you a right level of advice, like what regulations, you would ultimately fall into. If not regulation, they'll tell you what security requirements you have to fulfill. And assuming that if you are dealing with a lot of sensitive data, for an example, if you're a healthcare startup dealing with the people's health information, like there's a HIPAA compliance, right, requirement now. I mean, these kind of compliances, you should consult with an expert outside, maybe a lawyer if required, just so that you understand what's the undertaking you have with that collection of data or processing or storage of that data. And then more importantly, there's a thing called disclosure to the customers. They have the right to know. They have the right to know what information of them are you actually storing or processing. So it's a long list on when it comes to the entire data governance piece. I think we can do a separate webinar for that if you want, Paul. But I think there's a lot of undertaking, especially when you're collecting and processing or storing the data of customers, enterprises, or consumers.
Yeah, definitely, it's a dangerous area for sure. What can startups do to make cybersecurity a growth driver rather than a roadblock? Is it possible to do?
It's already the case. I mean, if you look at many startups today, many startups, when they go and pitch their solution to the large enterprises, cybersecurity, is a requirement. It's an imperative. So if you're not doing that, the likelihood that you're going to be able to land into large enterprise customers is very, very low, period. So if you want to make sure that you can go to all these big, companies and, it have those amazing logos, nice and cool looking contracts, security is a requirement. If you don't do that, that's not going to happen. But at the same time, if you don't have these large, big logos, or if you're not closing big deals, what's the likelihood you're going to be able to take your company to the next level? Maybe SMBs would be interested. And there's a big market, by the way. But even the SMBs, are becoming a lot more sensitive of cybersecurity because of the legal regulations and requirements and so forth. So if you want to win customers, cybersecurity is becoming one of the requirements for you to be able to work with them or be able to grow.
That's a really good point. Any final thoughts for our audience?
Cybersecurity is not hard. I think you'll see tons of gurus giving you all different type of advices and everything. In my opinion, whenever you are building up, your platform, it's always good to think, from a threat actor's perspective, like what are different ways I can get into your environment and being able to take the data. I think an engineer has a good understanding on the ways they can be able to, compromise a system. And this is especially, advice for the companies who don't really have a CISO or a security dedicated security person. So there's different groups of people we're talking here. I think for the very young companies who really don't have the right level of investments or budget to be able to put dedicated security people, I think they have to put on the hat of a bad guy and think on how they can hack into his computers. And then this is just a self-assessment exercise that you understand that these are the problems on how it can break. Let's go and, put some controls, maybe out of box to cloud environment to be able to mitigate some of those risks. As you mature, I think it's probably a good idea to bring some, experienced security person in charge for designing the entire security program, but also executing it. I think that becomes an important piece in the puzzle. But as you scale up, I think as you scale up the complexity on how you are, managing the data or creating different avenues to collect or process the information, I think it may warrant, further investments in your control design layers, right? So it's an evolving journey, but treat cybersecurity, as you rightly said, in the previous question, as a growth driver instead of being a roadblocker. I mean, it's going to be very hard for companies to be able to scale if they're not able to prove themselves that they do take cybersecurity seriously.
That's a really good point. Thank you. I've been chatting with Binu Arora, the founder and CEO of Cybel. Thanks so much for your time, and thank you to our audience for joining us also.
No, thanks for having me today, Paul. It was amazing. Thanks, everyone.